Story 1. I told him about my cat being sad because he was getting too old to jump on the windowsill. He came over the next weekend with tools, wood, and carpet samples and built a little staircase for him. Story 2. We took a road trip one year for Christmas so I could meet her family. 2 days in the car led to some of the best conversations ever. We solved many of the world's problems, evaluated the entire history of cinema and literature, and conspired about our future relationship and the richness of the human experience. It was amazing. When we arrived at her family's place, it was clear she had talked me up. They fully expected me to perform miracles. One night, while watching them wrap presents for the extended family's children, I realized with stunning clarity that I was looking at the rest of my life. Story 3. I don't remember ever thinking she wasn't the one. Maybe not in terms of marriage, but I had a strong feeling almost immediately. I truly fell in love. She didn't grow on me. However, it took 6 months to convince her to go on a date. But I knew when I had her that she was mine to lose. We have been a couple for 25 years and married for 21 years this year. Story 4. I didn't have a moment. It has happened gradually over time, each moment better than the last. It has worked out, though we've been married for over 39 years. Story 5. He went out of his way to make sure I was okay when my mom was dying. We had only known each other for a few weeks, and he could have run away, but he stayed and supported me until the very end. Story 6. Every time I have a bad day, whether it's a bad mood, hurting my back at work, feeling sick, being super tired, or anxious about something I can't explain, he is the most supportive, helpful, cheerful, cuddly, and sweetest person to me. I thank my lucky stars every day that we're together. The moment I realized he was marriage material was when I cried on his shoulder after I cut contact with my dad. All my sadness, anger, and disappointment at my father came out in a big, ugly crying mess. He held me tightly for what must have been a few hours while I got it all out of my system, and I never realized how much I needed that until I did. There was also the time when I was unwell for a week, and he took care of me and everything else while I was in bed, feeling my worst, yet so full of love and appreciation. I did the same for him the following week. His soul is genuinely good. His default is simply kindness and understanding. Story 7. First date. I was the consummate bachelor, never planning to marry after watching my parents and sister go through horrible divorces. I met my current wife after over 20 years of bachelorhood and several lackluster relationships, and I thought, oh, maybe. When I started introducing her to friends, many of them commented, yeah, your bachelor days are over, pal. We moved in together 3 months later, got engaged 3 months after that, and married 1 year to the day after we met. We've been together for 14 years this summer. Story 8. When she went away for a trip, I hated every minute we were apart. This was less than a year into our relationship. We have been together for 25 years and married for 23 years. Story 9. This may sound silly, but it was our second date. We are both from the same area, but he hadn't seen some local landmarks, so I suggested we turn it into an exploration trip. We went to the landmark he hadn't seen, took a ferry, visited an island, and had dinner at a favorite restaurant of mine that was 50 miles away before driving back. We probably drove over 200 miles that day. I found out later that he dislikes driving and being stuck in cars. I took a photo of us that day while waiting in line for the ferry, and the way he looked at me was filled with kindness and warmth. We've been through a lot since then. We met on a dating app, have been together for 7 years, married for 1.5 years, and our first child is arriving any day. I love that man. Story 10. We had been dating for a couple of months. When I told him I was tired and it was time for bed, he got up and did the same routine around the house that I always did, checking that the doors were locked and everything was secure, then checking on my sleeping son. Surprised me in a good way. We are still married over 26 years later. Story 11. I don't remember the first time, but 2 years after getting married, I still say at least once a week, I want to marry you, as if we aren't already married. Story 12. I met him at a friend's house. He opened the door when I knocked. As soon as I saw him, I knew I was going to marry that man, and I did. He will be 10 years in May. Story 13. We were in college, and I had been studying and working on a project all day long at my studio and library. I left campus around 11 p.m. and did not realize I had forgotten to eat dinner until I was already home. She was coming over to spend the night because we had not seen each other all day. I was just about to order something when she walked in the door carrying food for me. She anticipated my forgetfulness about eating, and something about that made me fall in love with her even more. I was in a bad and tired mood, and it melted away when she walked through the door. That was 7 years ago. We got married last year and are having a child together this year. Story 14. When I realized that he understood every single one of my Lord of the Rings jokes and references, we got married with the One Ring as our wedding band. Story 15. First date. I arrived at the location where we were meeting and saw him standing on the patio, watching for me and leaning against the railing. I just knew. We have been married for almost 10 years now. Story 16. We had been dating for a few months when I had a bicycle accident, broke my ankle, and went to the emergency room. She was a nurse in the emergency room at the time. After getting out of surgery, she told me, "It's time you came home with me." I spent about 3 months staying with her during my recovery. We have been married for over 10 years now. Story 17. I had been in 2 serious relationships, and both guys disliked how much I enjoyed watching Sex and the City. When I started dating someone new and mentioned that I was a fan, he bought me the entire series for Christmas but didn't want to wait and gave it to me early. He never criticized me. Instead, he watched it with me and appreciated the humor. We will celebrate 19 years of marriage in November. Story 18. I realized that he was the only person who never annoyed me when he interrupted me while I was reading. I'm an avid reader, and it's my favorite hobby. Usually, when someone interrupts me, I get quite irritated. However, I would always rather talk to him than read a book. Story 19. We were stranded by bad weather after a date. He had bronchitis, and with his driving and my care, we supported each other through it. Story 20. I was at home drinking and singing to Whitney Houston karaoke when he came over after work. It was so embarrassing until he set up a box fan in front of me and a broom as a fake microphone. We stayed up all night singing and dancing. I woke up the next morning, and he had made sure I had everything I needed to get through work the next day. Extra water, pain reliever, phone charger, and even went out to get me breakfast and rehydration solution. We are celebrating 10 years together this year and our 5th wedding anniversary in a couple of days. Story 21. My husband mentioned he was thinking about proposing. It hit me right there. We had been together for 7 years, and marriage wasn't something I considered much. I was simply happy with how things were that the next step didn't cross my mind. Story 22. When I saw her, I realized she was the kindest, most honest, and most beautiful woman I had ever met. Story 23. It was a gradual realization for me. I was never interested in marriage initially, but after a couple of years, I couldn't imagine life without her. I knew she wanted marriage, and then she suggested the idea of eloping. Many factors contributed to this decision, but her effort to accommodate me after so long made me realize we were in it for the long term. We got married last year in Greece the way we wanted. It was a combination of ceremony and honeymoon. We had a reception back home with family and friends, and this year we celebrate our 1st anniversary on a pseudo-honeymoon with a cruise. For us, marriage wasn't about wanting things to change, but about maintaining the good thing we had. Story 24. When they laughed at my terrible joke and didn't immediately run away, I knew I had found my soulmate, or at least someone who could tolerate my humor. Story 25. I was 17 when I threw a party while my parents were out of town. He heard about it and stopped by even though we went to different high schools. I walked down to my basement, saw him standing there, and thought to myself, that's the one I want. I called him the next day and asked him to prom. He accepted and we went. At the after party, we sat outside, totally sober, and looked at the stars. Right before he leaned in to kiss me, I thought, I'm going to marry this guy. It was so surreal. I didn't know much at 17, but I knew I loved him. That was in 1996. We've been together ever since and married in 2002. We have 2 kids and 4 dogs, with some major ups and downs, but I have never stopped looking at him and thinking, that's the one I want. Story 26. It was when she said, my virginity is important to me, so we are not going to have sex until we are married. It was not the only factor, but it was definitely one of them. However, we lasted 20 years and had 2 kids, so I have no regrets. Story 27. We kept bumping into each other until we became best friends. He took his own life, so I doubt we will be getting married in this lifetime. He has proposed in my dreams, and I have had my wedding too. Somewhere, I know we are married and happy. Story 28. When I realized I was thinking about her all the time and that seeing her made me happier than I had ever been before, my wife told me she knew I was the one when I dropped everything and drove to her house after she called to inform me that one of her cousins had passed away. We had only been dating a couple of weeks at that point. The first time I met most of her family was at the funeral. I don't think I had even met her parents before then. Story 29. My husband always says he knew he was going to marry me at the end of our second date when I looked over at him and smiled before unlocking my car. I remember this moment because he had a look on his face like he could transform into a puddle. I was just nervously smiling. It wasn't until a few dates later that I knew I was going to marry him. There was no exact moment. Someone jokingly asked me if I thought we'd get married, and I said yes. They were shocked because we had just started dating and weren't even official. Story 30. When he asked, I saw the ring that I had mentioned in casual conversation over 10 years ago since we have been friends forever. Story 31. Someone asked me, and without hesitation, I said yes. I didn't even realize until that moment that I was already planning to spend the rest of my life with him. Story 32. I already knew I was infatuated with her, but I was cautious after a difficult marriage in the past. She met my sister-in-law, whose judgment I trust completely. Just 5 minutes after meeting her, she pulled me aside and said, she's a keeper. Story 33. My husband and I met in 2011 on Tumblr and were close friends for years. I got to know his siblings and parents through Skype and became best friends with one of his sisters as well. In 2016, their parents offered to cover my airfare to fly me out to meet the family in person if I could get the time off work. From the moment I met my now husband in person, our connection was electric. Something inside me said, oh, this is what we've been waiting for. A few days later, we kissed for the first time shortly before we were supposed to visit his parents with his sister. On our car ride to their house, I was looking out the window lost in thought when I suddenly imagined making a post of a picture of the 3 of us with the caption, from the womb to the tomb until death do us part. In that moment, I realized I was going to marry him, and my best friend was going to become my sister-in-law. We got married 14 months later, and we had a son last year. His aunt loves to spoil him already. Story 34. I had a moment yesterday with my girlfriend, and it was something simple. She posted a sweet birthday collage of the 2 of us on her social media, and it made my heart melt. Overall, the day was great. I am counting my blessings, as the last several years of birthdays were celebrated in both literal and mental prison due to substance abuse. But I digress. This woman has been there for me through it all, including working on herself as I do, so we are both becoming better people and can bring the best version of ourselves to the relationship. Yesterday, as I mentioned, that simple gesture was my moment of realizing, I'm going to marry this woman. Peace and love to you all. Story 35. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type I in my early 20s, with symptoms appearing quite late. I felt angry, upset, and overwhelmed. I experienced hallucinations, broke both my hands punching walls, attempted suicide, relied on alcohol, and nearly destroyed every relationship I had. It was a difficult journey for me, and I can't imagine how hard it was for her. I will spend the rest of my life trying to prove to her that I deserve her, even though I often feel I do not. For some reason, she believes she deserves me, so I strive to be the best version of myself. That's why she is my wife. Story 36. She came over to tell me it wasn't going to work out with her boyfriend. I was making macaroni and cheese. She was crying, and I knew it was going to be all right. We got married 7 months later. We have been married for 20 years this summer. Story 37. Her hands clenched, and her body shook violently as she climaxed. She lost her ability to speak and then looked down at me, asking, "What did you just do to me? I can't move my hands." Story 38. I just want to thank you all for your stories. You have all been wonderful and have a great sense of humor. Story 39. We have been together since birth. We started dating when I was 14, and I just knew it was right. Now, it has been more than 20 years since we began living together. Story 40. When he didn't find it weird that I was perfectly happy playing Tomb Raider for hours. Not only that, he was a game developer working for a company that made games I loved. My previous boyfriend left me because I spent too much time playing games. His criticism still lingers, even though I've been with Mr. Pullet for 26 years and married for 23. Story 41. I met my husband on a camping trip with a large group of mutual friends and some family. My aunt was cooking breakfast over the fire for everyone. He was sitting with his hoodie up, looking all mysterious. I was a sucker for that kind of thing. My aunt was sweating, preparing the last of the pancake batter when he offered to take over so she could relax and eat. She gladly accepted the help. He finished cooking and then cleaned everything up. None of the younger group offered to help, who were mostly in their 20s. That caught my attention. Later in the day, we all went for a long hike. I walked next to him, and for the next couple of hours, we went back and forth listing ridiculous ways to die, like spontaneous duck attack or reverse gravity vortex. We shared the same dark sense of humor. We dated, and a year later, he proposed to me on a hike during another trip. More than 20 years later, we are still very much in love, and my aunt enthusiastically approved. Story 42. He walked into the restaurant where I was. I saw him and told my friends I was going to marry him. We dated for 6 months, broke up for years, but are now back together and planning a wedding. Something in me just knew. Story 43. The first time I met my husband was among a group of mutual friends. I just knew when I looked at him. It wasn't necessarily love at first sight, but he felt familiar. I remember thinking to myself, I just met my husband. At the time, I laughed at myself for thinking it, but 3 years later, we were married, and I am very grateful for that little gathering set up by friends. Story 44. There was a Del Taco on campus at UCLA when my wife and I were undergraduates decades ago. I had a quick bite to eat there just before midweek church services. Later that evening, I ended up vomiting the contents of my stomach into the gutter in front of my apartment for what seemed like an hour. My wife was with me the entire time, patting my back, and I surely looked my absolute worst. Story 45. He had said, "I love you," and I had been told that before by other people. But then he left for a week-long trip to visit his aunt. By day 5 or 6, I was strangely upset. How does he say, "I love you," and then just leave? I went on a 15-mile run that day, and at my halfway point, I realized it was the first time I actually cared that someone said, "I love you." Maybe sometimes life is a whirlwind and moves too fast, so I didn't get to think through how I felt about someone and just went with it in uninspiring relationships. We are getting married later this year. Story 46. To be honest, it was before our first date. We had been chatting on a dating app for a few days, and one night I was unresponsive because I was struggling with a graduate school assignment. He called me and spent the whole night helping me work through it. He didn't try to distract me or change the subject to anything more interesting. He just knew I was busy and stressed and wanted to help me through it. He was genuinely interested in my passion and work, and my stress melted away. I just knew. Story 47. When we were living long distance, he would finish work on a Friday night at 5:30. He would drive to my house and not arrive until between 7:30 and 8 p.m., just to go to bed by 10 o'clock and wake up at 2:30 a.m. to drive back to work the next day. If he wanted to, he would. Story 48. We had been watching the series Girls together, and he reacted with emotional depth and understanding of the female characters. Overall, he was respectful. I thought, this is great. And it is. Story 49. I was at my parents' house talking to my mom and sister about the guys we were dating when I blurted out that he was everything I had been looking for in a partner. I then realized I had just said that out loud, and it was true. We moved in together 3 months later, married 5 years later, have been together for 12 years, and just welcomed our baby boy 3 months ago. Story 50. Watching him laugh on our first date and having an amazing time with him made me think about my future husband. We became official 11 days later. He moved into my apartment about 4 months later. Then we moved into a house, adopted a dog, and got married on our first anniversary. Story 51. He gifted me a chess set for my birthday. In previous relationships, my exes always chose generic and superficial gifts like makeup and jewelry. I was grateful at the time, but as someone with a variety of niche hobbies, I never felt truly appreciated. It became clear that they primarily valued my appearance and reliability. Receiving a chess set was like getting a love letter to my personality. We sat on the floor and played all night, talked about our childhoods, our future, and our random interests. It was the best night of my life. That's when I knew he was the one. Story 52. I got into a major accident. He was on the other side of the world. I didn't call emergency services. I didn't call my family or my friends. My mind immediately focused on calling him. I realized then that I had been doing this for every major event, both good and bad, in my life for 2 years. Story 53. Honestly, the day he replied to my message on an online dating app was memorable. Years ago, I had been engaged, but my fiancé passed away. 7 years after his death, I was on a dating app, struggling to find someone. I found an interesting profile and sent a message, but received no reply for 6 weeks. I was disappointed because the profile seemed great, but again, I had no luck. I noticed he hadn't been online in weeks. This app displayed when users were last active. I am not sure if they still have that feature. Then came the anniversary of my fiancé's passing, coincidentally. While driving to work, I talked to him, saying, "I'm having terrible luck and can't find my person on my own. You know who'd be good for me? I need you to put him in front of me." That day, while driving home from work, I received a reply from the person I had messaged 6 weeks prior. He mentioned he had taken a break from dating but felt an urge to check his messages that day. He asked for my name and I asked for his. I met my fiancé in a grocery store where we both worked, which had a name similar to Michael's Foods. When the message from this new person came through, it was the same name as the grocery store. I just knew. We've been married for 6 years now. Story 54. I canceled a date because I was sick. He showed up half an hour later with soup, medicine, and the Lord of the Rings box set. We lay in bed all night and binge-watched. Story 55. We dated for a short while, about 3 months. She was a fairly adventurous woman, so for her birthday, I surprised her with a whitewater rafting trip. Neither of us had ever done that before. To make it more interesting, I chose a 2-person raft that was unguided. We had a blast, laughing the entire time. We came close to getting thrown out many times. I bought photos from photographers who sat along the banks to sell them to us. Afterward, in the hotel room, she told me that she had a healthy fear of water, but since I seemed excited about it, she went along with it. I knew then. Later, while she was showering, I tossed a container of salsa over the shower curtain, and it got in her eyes. She screamed, I laughed, and then she laughed. I think that's when she knew, too. Story 56. We had only been dating for a month when I got COVID-19 really badly during Christmas. He still lived over 2 hours away, and on Christmas night, before I got off the phone with him at midnight, I mentioned that all I wanted was Wawa ice. This man drove on Christmas night to bring me Wawa ice. That was it. We got married on February 14th, 2023. Story 57. I met him at work. 6 months later, I was pregnant. I knew before I told him that he was the one. We've been together ever since. 15 years in total and married for 13 years. Story 58. It was really surprising. I had casually mentioned that I loved a specific kind of sponge for hand-washing dishes, and the next time I was at his place, he had replaced his sponges. He not only figured out the type, but also trusted my opinion enough to replace all of his. It showed me that he not only listened to me, but also valued my perspective on even the most mundane subjects. Story 59. I am currently experiencing many moments of doubt about marrying this person, but I don't think that is what you mean. Story 60. Less than 60 seconds before I proposed. That was about 75 days after we first met, on our third day in a relationship, 2 days after our first kiss, having been on half a date together, and less than a minute after saying I love you for the first time. Story 61. It was one day when the longing caught him in our long-distance relationship, and he looked so sad at me from my screen that it broke my heart. I knew I wanted to be by his side for the rest of our lives. I cannot wait to wear his ring, take his name, and be a part of his family. He is everything I have ever wanted. Story 62. I was touring with my band, and we were all heavy cannabis users. We got stopped at a checkpoint in El Paso because I forgot I had marijuana with me. We were all sent to an interrogation room, and it hit me that they must have found something in my bag. She is American and I am Mexican, but I am a green card holder. Not wanting to risk my residency, I signaled to her, asking if she was willing to take the blame. She just nodded her head, and that's when I knew we were bonded forever. Story 63. When I saw a picture of his son from his first marriage, I thought I need a cute baby. I was 20. Sue me. Story 64. When she moved with me to another country, it took a lot to make that happen. Oh wait, no. She left me for someone else just when I had put a large deposit down on an apartment for us to live in. I had to keep paying that bill for a long time afterward. Story 65. On our first date, we quoted lines from the Blues Brothers back and forth. My immediate thought was that this person would fit perfectly with my family. Story 66. I watched Ellen. I thought I must paint you. Then when I painted her, I knew I had to marry her. But she's a lesbian and I'm a man. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.